Stephen Hufford, and rank was CYN3. Well, I think the memorable story is just the interaction between the guys and the reactions that we did, and the shore leaves that we went on, and the general camaraderie that we have and still carry on to this day. And like, I am aging out, and on my ship, the Saratoga, it was decommissioned in 1994. So there are no more Saratoga sailors. And when we're gone, that's the end of it. And kind of to go back, there was another Saratoga in World War II, Saratoga CV3, and it served in World War II, and it survived World War II, but it met its end during the after stages of the, maybe in the Cold War, when we were testing atomic bombs and what they would do. They took a whole fleet of World War II ships that they were going to muster out of the fleet, and lined them up like they were a flotilla, armament flotilla at the Bikini Atoll in the Pacific. And they dropped an atomic bomb down on them, and to see what would happen. You know, it was a test to see if we could survive an atomic bomb. Saratoga didn't go under. All the other ones did. Saratoga stayed afloat. But they did then finally went in and they cut a couple of holes in the hull and let it sink to the bottom. So the CV3 Saratoga is now an atoll, is a coral base for fish at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. And the Saratoga that I was on was commissioned in 1956, and it was, you know, a larger ship. And so and the new naming protocol that the Navy uses, there will no, at this time there is little hope that there'll ever be another Saratoga. This is the end of the line. And in that fashion, this is our 71st Saratoga reunion. So that goes back to the CV3 World War II veterans started the organization, the reunions, and we co-mingled and had it together. And they attended ours when theirs was gone. They attended ours. And I think it was 2 years ago was the last year that I could remember a World War II Saratoga sailor being able to make it to one of our reunions. But there are still some of their widows that come to this day, come to the reunion. I think once you go to the reunion, you don't know a stranger. You didn't know these guys on the ship. Maybe I had 7 that I actually served with on my deployment when I started going to the reunions. But there was about 40 that either served before me or served after me in that same division. So, you know, we all kind of bonded together. And generally on the ship, it's so big, you kind of socialize with the men in your own division. It's just like a city. You don't know everybody in the city. And you have a neighbor that you might see him and say hello, but you don't really know him, you don't really associate. And that's kind of like it is. But at the reunions, everybody is your shipmate. And so you commingle and you learn and you become friends with people that you don't know. And the way this kind of works, there was a man that his name is Sammy, and I'll just say first names because again he doesn't know this, but he served before me. But I got to know him at the reunions, and he lives in Kentucky, and I live in Missouri. But we became friends, and he had come to Kansas City every now and then, and because his granddaughter moved out here, come to see her. And there was another guy, his name is Dennis, and he served on the Saratoga after me. But he actually was here in Harrisburg. He was born and raised in this area, but he moved to Kansas. Now he lives down by Wichita, Kansas. And he got a ticket, 4 tickets to the NASCAR race. And he didn't know anybody, he didn't really know anybody that in that area that served on the Saratoga. So he called Sammy in Kentucky and asked Sammy, do you know anybody in the Kansas City area that would like to go to a NASCAR race? So Sammy called me in Missouri and said, hey, Steve, would you like to go to a NASCAR race? Because there's this guy, Dennis, in Wichita that has 4 tickets. And he would like to know if I knew anybody that had a wife and wanted to go with him and his wife to the race. I said, well, I'll check with my wife. And I talked to my wife. She said, yeah, we'll go. And so I called Sammy. Sammy called Dennis. Dennis called me, and we met. We met at the Kansas Speedway maybe 3 years ago. And now we're friends. And Dennis actually was the sponsor of this reunion because he was originally from the Harrisburg area. So you build these relationships, and you never, ever, ever know when you going to meet somebody. And kind of, you know, if you think about back at Nehemiah, there's 100 men on the base. And there's a town called Parkville, Missouri, outside of Kansas City. It has a population of about 2,000 people, 20,000 people. And it's a suburb of Kansas City. And my dentist office happened to be in Parkville. So I went to the dentist office one day, and I was sitting there waiting for the dentist to see me. And there was this couple, I would say older, but I'm kind of older too, but they weren't young kids. And I heard him say something to his wife about when he was in Greece that he had gone to see the Acropolis. And I interrupted, and I said, oh, you've been to Greece? And he says, yeah. I says, I was in the Navy. And I said, oh, you were? He said, yeah, I was in the Navy. And I said, well, where were you? And he said, oh, I was at, you know, you never heard of it. It's a little town called Nehemiah. And so here we are, thousands of miles away, and you never, so now we're friends. And then to even top it all off, one of the guys that I shared the beach house with, Bernie, who is from the Pittsburgh area, but made a career out of the Navy and retired as a chief down in Florida. And when he re-enlisted, he married a Greek girl, and they're still married at this time. And he did a second tour of duty at Nehemiah. And Ed, that I met at my dentist's office, actually knew Bernie because he served with Bernie on his second term when he was there. And so you just, these things that kind of camaraderie that you develop and you have with military service, I think it's just miraculous. And then another time, my son volunteers for Park and Rec volleyball, and he coaches teams, volleyball teams in Parkville School District. And I usually volunteer to line judge for the games. And I walked in one time with my Saratoga hat on, and this guy come up to me and says, oh, you were in the Navy? And I said, yeah, I was in the Navy. He said, well, so was I. Oh, really? Where were you? And he said, well, you know, you probably never heard of this place, but Nehemiah, Greece. And I said, what? He said, yeah, Nehemiah, Greece, and actually I was a CB, and we built the base. So, you know, you just never, ever know. And that's why I am proud. I'm proud that I served, and I would do it again.